The movie begins in England, specifically in the year 740 AD, where an evil sorceress named Morgana threatens human life. However, she is confronted by a powerful wizard named Merlin. We learn that Merlin has 3 apprentices whom he taught magic: Balthazar, Veronica, and Horvath. Merlin manages to defeat Morgana's magic, but suddenly his apprentice Horvath betrays him and helps Morgana in her quest to rule the world and dominate humanity. Morgana kills Merlin and steals from his book a very dark spell that allows her to summon soldiers and creatures from another realm. Balthazar, Merlin's apprentice, tries to confront Morgana's evil, but she is stronger and overpowers him. Veronica sacrifices herself, using a spell to trap Morgana's soul within her own body to save her beloved Balthazar. Balthazar is then forced to imprison Veronica inside a magical vessel to eliminate Morgana, the evil sorceress. Balthazar also manages to trap Horvath, Morgana's accomplice. Later, Balthazar visits Merlin, who is clearly on the verge of death. Merlin gives Balthazar his magical ring, shaped like a dragon, and tells him that he must find the chosen child and teach him everything about magic, as he is the only one capable of confronting Morgana when she escapes from the vessel. After this, Merlin dies, and Balthazar sets out to find the chosen child to defeat Morgana and save his beloved Veronica. Many years later, the story shifts to New York in the year 2000, where we meet a boy named David who is on a school trip. David tries to draw on a window to catch the attention of a girl he likes named Becky. After a while, he writes her a note asking if she agrees to be in a relationship with him. Becky writes her response on the note, leaves it, and walks away. David goes to get the note to see her answer, but suddenly the note flies away into the street. He chases after it until he ends up in an antique shop. David enters the shop to look for his note and meets Balthazar, the wizard. Feeling nervous, David explains that he entered the shop by accident while searching for his note. Balthazar tells him that his presence there is no coincidence, and that he must be the chosen one, the heir of Merlin, whom he has been searching for over many years. Balthazar takes out Merlin's magical ring and asks David to wear it. David puts on the ring and is surprised when it moves in a strange way and settles on his hand. Balthazar is amazed and tells David that he has finally found him after years of searching. He tells David that his first magic lesson will begin immediately. Balthazar leaves briefly to get something for teaching magic, and David, curious, uses the ring to activate its magical abilities, which allow him to move objects. Unfortunately, he accidentally moves the magical vessel containing Horvath, Morgana's accomplice. The vessel opens, releasing insects that form into Horvath. Balthazar arrives just in time to stop Horvath and attempts to trap him again. However, Horvath manages to free himself and uses magic against Balthazar. A battle ensues between the two, with each using their magical powers. David, frightened, hides and accidentally finds the magical vessel containing Morgana, the evil sorceress. Horvath tries to take the vessel from David to free Morgana and rule the world together, but Balthazar intervenes. The magical vessel opens and pulls both Balthazar and Horvath inside. David, terrified, runs out of the antique shop and throws Morgana's magical vessel into the street. When David's classmates and teacher arrive, he tells them that sorcerers were fighting inside the shop. The teacher enters the shop but finds it perfectly organized as if nothing had happened. No one believes David's story. 10 years later, David has grown up and is living with a friend named Bennett while studying physics at New York University. David is passionate about physics and, by chance, meets Becky, the girl he loved in school. He is delighted to learn that she still remembers him. He asks her about her life, and she tells him she works as a radio presenter and is not fond of studying physics. After university, they walk together until they reach the radio station where Becky works. Suddenly, lightning strikes the station's transmitter. They quickly enter to fix the problem. The station staff are unable to repair the transmitter, so David offers to help. He successfully fixes it, impressing Becky with his intelligence. It is clear that she admires him. Later, David goes to his lab to work on an invention he is building. He tells his friend Bennett about what happened, but Bennett is upset and tells David he should have asked Becky out. David ignores him, turns on the radio to listen to Becky, and activates his invention. It turns out to be a device that generates electrical waves resembling lightning, which he can fully control. Meanwhile, a couple purchases the magical vessel that had trapped Balthazar and Horvath. The vessel moves strangely, and suddenly Horvath emerges from it. He throws the vessel out of the window to destroy it and kill Balthazar permanently. Fortunately, Balthazar escapes at the last moment without Horvath noticing. Shortly after, Horvath visits David's home and asks him about Morgana's magical magical vessel. David is shocked to see him and says he doesn't remember where the vessel is, as 10 years have passed since the incident. Horvath leaves, but not before noticing a picture of wolves. He uses magic to bring the wolves to life, and they chase after David. David runs into a subway station to hide, but one of the wolves attacks him. Suddenly, the wolves transform into small dogs at the last moment, and Balthazar appears riding a metal eagle. He uses magic to fend off Horvath and rescues David. Balthazar takes David to a skyscraper in New York City. David is overwhelmed by everything happening. Balthazar explains that David is the sole heir to Merlin's magic, and the only one who can stand against Morgana, the evil sorceress. Therefore, they must find the magical vessel as quickly as possible before Horvath does. Using magic, Balthazar discovers that the vessel is located in Chinatown. On the other side, Horvath is reviewing his memories when David was young and threw the magical vessel in front of the antique shop. He uses his magic to discover that a Chinese woman took the vessel. After a while, he secretly finds the location of the vessel and meets the Chinese woman. He asks her to give him the magical vessel, but it's clear he doesn't trust her. He speaks to her in Chinese, and when he realizes she doesn't understand him, he discovers it's a trick and attacks her. It turns out that it was Horvath disguised as the woman who found Morgana's magical vessel. Balthazar demands he hand over the vessel, but Horvath refuses and tells him he has released one of the evil sorcerers that Balthazar had imprisoned in the magical vessel. At that moment, the freed sorcerer stands behind Balthazar and uses his magic to launch deadly thorns at him. Balthazar manages to protect himself and fights back. Meanwhile, David witnesses everything and runs away quickly. The sorcerer then turns a toy dragon into a real dragon, which chases David to kill him. Balthazar captures Horvath, steals the magical vessel containing the evil sorceress Morgana, and escapes. Meanwhile, the dragon corners David on a building rooftop. David tries to use Merlin's magic ring and successfully burns the dragon, eventually defeating the evil sorcerer and killing him. Afterward, Balthazar gets into the car with David and tells him they need to completely destroy the evil sorceress Morgana. If David doesn't want to help, he must give up Merlin's ring. David refuses to hand over the ring and asks Balthazar to teach him magic so he can confront Morgana. Balthazar agrees and says they need to go to a hidden location to start his training. Balthazar takes him to his lab, places Morgana's vessel on a table, and hides it so no one else can see it. He then gives David a book containing everything about magic techniques and creates a circle of fire with strange magical symbols. He tells David he must enter the circle to focus all his energy and use magic. David steps into the circle and begins training to summon an energy ball using magic. Meanwhile, Horvath goes to a sorcerer named Mike and asks for his help to defeat Balthazar. Mike agrees and tells him they need to devise a plan, since Balthazar is very powerful and not easily defeated. At this time, David manages to control his energy and uses magic. Later, Balthazar takes David out to eat. By coincidence, David sees his girlfriend Becky leaves Balthazar and goes to talk to her. He asks where she's headed, and she tells him she's taking the subway. When they enter the subway, a thief appears with a knife, demanding Becky's back. She gives him everything she has, and the thief escapes before the police can catch him. David chases the thief, puts on his ring, and uses magic to close all the subway's exit doors. He confronts the thief and throws a garbage can at him, defeating him. He then returns Becky's belongings to her, and she thanks him for helping her before boarding the subway. David asks her to come to his lab the next day to show her something important. The next day, Horvath arrives in the city center and tells his assistant Mike that this is the perfect place to summon Morgana. He also tells him their plan won't work unless they defeat David first and take his ring, since David is Merlin's magical heir and the only one who can stand against Morgana. At this time, David is in the lab training with Balthazar to use magic. Suddenly, Becky knocks on the door, interrupting his training. David goes to open the door and introduces Balthazar to Becky as his uncle. Balthazar greets her warmly, but says he has to leave for an important errand. Later, Balthazar goes to his antique shop and retrieves the necklace of his beloved Veronica, who sacrificed herself by imprisoning Morgana's soul inside her body to save him. Meanwhile, David activates his invention to show Becky, controlling electricity to create musical tones for Becky's favorite song. Becky is impressed by David's intelligence and tells him he's a brilliant inventor. Afterward, they go out together, and David drops Becky off at her yoga class. Later, while David is in the bathroom, Mike appears and threatens to kill him unless he reveals the location of the magical vessel imprisoning Morgana. Horvath then arrives and tells David that Balthazar is hiding a big secret. He wants to open the magical vessel and make David fight Morgana to free her from Veronica's body. Without warning, Balthazar appears and attacks Hovers using his magic, attempting to trap him in another dimension through a mirror. Hovers resists, and Mike tries to use his magic against Balthazar, but it backfires, trapping Hovers in the mirror. Balthazar defeats Mike, locks him in the bathroom, and rescues David. Shortly after, Hovers escapes from the dimension he was trapped in and goes to the Student Affairs office at New York University, taking control of the staff there to gather information about David. He successfully discovers the location of David's lab. At this time, David is preparing to train in magic, but suddenly remembers his appointment with Becky. He asks Balthazar to speed up the training because he wants to get closer to Becky and confess his feelings for her. Balthazar agrees, visibly affected as he remembers his beloved Veronica. Later, David decides to clean the lab. With Becky's appointment approaching, he uses magic to make brooms and cleaning tools tidy up the lab while he takes a shower. When he finishes, he finds the lab flooded with water and the cleaning tools out of control. He tries to stop them, but Becky arrives unexpectedly. He opens the door for her, nervously tells her to leave because he has a problem, and slams the door in her face. David rushes to stop the tools before they destroy his invention, but unfortunately, the water reaches the invention, electrifying the entire lab and trapping him. Balthazar arrives just in time, cancels the magic affecting the brooms and cleaning tools, and restores everything to normal. He scolds David, telling him magic isn't a game and shouldn't be used for personal purposes. David argues back, saying he's not a sorcerer but just an ordinary person obsessed with physics and inventions. Later that night, David goes to the radio station where Becky works to apologize for his behavior at the lab. However, he senses she's upset with him and hesitates to approach her, eventually leaving without saying anything. Becky notices him from afar and follows him to talk. David then arrives at a tall tower in the city center, feeling hopeless and thinking about throwing away his magic ring. Becky arrives before he throws it and tells him she's not upset with him. At the same time, Balthazar is in the lab. David comes and apologizes to him for the things he said. Suddenly, he uses magic and attacks Balthazar, tying him up. We discover that this was a trick by Mike, who disguised himself as David. Horvath arrives and uses his magic too, creating a cloud of smoke to reveal anything hidden. The cloud reveals the location of Morgana's magical vessel. Horvath takes the vessel to free her. Suddenly, Balthazar frees himself and attacks him. Horvath aims a set of knives at him. Before they touch his face, they freeze in the air. Balthazar realizes that David saved him at the last moment. Horvath and his assistant escape. David apologizes to Balthazar and they get in the car to follow them. Horvath manipulates all the cars on the road into taxis to distract them. David uses his magical power to locate their car. He successfully identifies it and they follow them. Horvath turns his car into a Mercedes and speeds off. Balthazar does the same, transforming his car to catch up with them. After a long chase, they find Horvath facing them with a massive vehicle. He intends to kill them, so Balthazar reverses the car and David fails to transform it. It turns into a very old model and breaks down. Horvath places a roof over the car, but luckily nothing happens to them. They get out and find Horvath fleeing. Balthazar searches for him, but Horvath uses his magic to transform an old woman into the form of his beloved Veronica to distract him. Balthazar, of course, is deeply affected when he sees her. When he tries to talk to her, the old woman reverts to her true form. The trick succeeds, and they escape with Morgana's magical vessel. Later, Balthazar returns to the lab and tells David about his past. He explains that he was going to marry his beloved Veronica on the day she sacrificed herself for him. He had prepared a necklace as a gift for her. David is moved and promises to rescue Veronica. Meanwhile, Horvath is at Mike's house, his assistant. He shows him the magical vessel of an evil sorceress who was Morgana's assistant. He explains that the vessel requires a great amount of energy to open. Thus, he kills Mike, taking his energy and his magic ring, and frees the sorceress from the vessel. At this time, David's beloved Becky is at her radio station. Suddenly, a strange-looking little girl appears in front of her and tells her she will kidnap her. We understand that this is the evil sorceress released by Horvath from the magical vessel. The sorceress goes to Horvath and tells him she kidnapped Becky as he instructed. Of course, he did this to use her as leverage against David to take his ring. Horvath kills the sorceress, taking her energy and her ring as well, to gather enough power to free Morgana. Later, Balthazar and David arrive at Horvath's location. They split up to search for Morgana's magical vessel. Balthazar finds a map of the place where Horvath plans to free Morgana. Suddenly, the ground beneath him begins to pull him down, immobilizing his legs. This is, of course, one of Horvath's tricks. Meanwhile, David finds Morgana's magical vessel. He takes it and looks for for Balthazar to help him escape. He is shocked to find Horvath holding Becky hostage. Horvath demands he hand over his magic ring and the vessel, threatening to kill Becky. David realizes it was a trap to lure them in and take his ring to gather enough energy to open the vessel and release Morgana. He is forced to comply, handing over the ring and vessel to save Becky. Horvath releases Becky and leaves, beginning his plan. Balthazar arrives, having freed himself, and asks David about the vessel. David explains what happened and apologizes for handing over the ring and vessel, saying Becky's life was very important to him. Balthazar tells him he understands his decision, as he would have done the same in his place. Balthazar decides to face Horvath and Morgana alone. Later, Becky is confused and doesn't understand what's happening. David explains everything to her, saying he must help Balthazar save the world from Morgana's evil. He takes Becky to go to Balthazar. He calls his friend Bennett and asks him to bring the electricity control device from the lab. David tells Becky he has a good idea to defeat Morgana, using the device to generate electrical charges, immobilize her, and trap her again. Bennett arrives with the device, and David installs it in Balthazar's car. Suddenly, Bennett tells him he found a letter Balthazar left for him in the lab. David opens the letter and finds the necklace and a note from Balthazar, asking him to give it to Veronica if anything happens to him. David is moved and decides to go to Morgana to stop her before she uses her spell to summon the army that will help her take over the world. Meanwhile, Horvath successfully opens the magical vessel, releasing Morgana, whose spirit enters Veronica's body. Morgana begins to fully control Veronica's body and prepares her spell. Beams of light appear in all directions, forming a circle that will open a portal to another world, allowing an army of strange creatures to enter and help Morgana take over the world. David sees the beams and tells Becky that Morgana is preparing her spell. He explains that Horvath placed satellite dishes to reflect the beams and form the portal through which her army will emerge. He asks Becky to climb the building and destroy one of the satellite dishes to cancel Morgana's spell. Balthazar arrives at Morgana's location and tries to sneak up on her. Horvath stops him, using his magic to animate a statue of an iron bull to attack Balthazar. David arrives at the last moment, using the electrical energy from his device to defeat Horvath. At this point, Morgana's spell circle is nearly complete, and her army is about to emerge. Suddenly, Becky destroys the satellite dish, reflecting the beams, canceling the spell entirely. Morgana begins to lose her power and faints. Balthazar approaches Morgana and decides to sacrifice himself to save his beloved. He pulls Morgana's spirit from Veronica's body and places it within himself. He asks David to trap him inside the magic vessel before Morgana takes control of his body. David refuses to trap him. Suddenly, Morgana's spirit exits his body, uses her magic, and unleashes a powerful fire aimed at them to kill them. Without warning, David counters her magic, impressing Balthazar because he managed to use magic without a ring, proving he is truly Merlin's heir. Unfortunately, Morgana overpowers him and unleashes an electric strike aimed at the three of them. Balthazar shields his beloved, taking the strike himself, and dies. David is devastated by Balthazar's death. He targets an electric cabinet with a strike, clearly planning something. He then starts aiming his attacks at Morgana, but they don't affect her since she is merely a spirit. Morgana unleashes all her energy in a strike against David. It is revealed that when David struck the electric cabinet, he managed to control the cables within it. He ties them around the electric pole surrounding him and seizes the opportunity to activate the electric cabinet, paralyzing Morgana. Then he directs electric strikes at her from all directions until he eliminates her forever. Afterward, Balthazar collapses, and David forms a circle around him, attempting to use magic to revive his heart with an electric shock. Suddenly, Balthazar wakes up and comes back to life. David gives him Veronica's necklace, which he had kept in his pocket, so Balthazar can give it to her himself. David then goes to Becky, confesses his love for her, and the movie ends. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.